All right, we're going to be talking about glomerular filtration, tubular reabsorption, and tubular secretion. So when we talked about glomerular filtration, in glomerular filtration, we talked about the three pressures that are going to produce our filtrate. So filtrate is literally hydrostatic pressure, the urine that we're going to produce. So we talked about the three different types of pressures. The three different types of pressures is your hydrostatic pressure, which is going to make filtrate, your capsular hydrostatic pressure, which forces it back in, and your blood colloid osmotic pressure. This is all considered to be your glomerular filtrate. So anytime you use the word filtrate in the kidney, the word filtrate is going to occur at the glomerulus. This is going to be your glomerular filtration rate based on those three pressures. You're filtering out your blood into the glomerular capsule, which is going to form your filtrate that's going to go out with the urine. Now, before you can get rid of your urine, we need to reabsorb nutrients back into the body. So when you say tubular, we're talking about the renal tubules. The proximal convolated tubule, the descending limb of loop of Henle, the ascending limb of loop of Henle, and the distal convolated tubule. So when you say tubule reabsorption, we're going to reclaim substances back to the body. So of course you're going to reabsorb most of your water. Water is the most important thing. We're going to reabsorb glucose. We can also say amino acids on here. Any amino acids that we have that we could use, we're going to reabsorb those things. Sodium is an electrolyte, chloride, potassium, hydrogen ions if you needed it, bicarbonate. You could add to this list things like calcium would be included on that. So electrolytes, we need all these things for our body to work. Now, tubular secretion, on the other hand, is us getting rid of substances. Our waste products that we're going to get rid of a lot of times is going to be potassium and hydrogen ions, because we continually reabsorb sodium on a more constant basis. And this is substances being removed from the blood, which is going to be from the capillaries, and add it to the filtrate. So this is your waste products that goes out with the urine. So we're going to draw basically our nephron. So we have our afferent arteriole and our glomerulus, and then our efferent arteriole. And of course you would have your capsule, because you need the capsule to collect your filtrate. So then you have your proximal convolated tubule, your descending limb of loop of Henle, your ascending limb of loop of Henle, and your distal convolated tubule, which is going to empty into the collecting duct. But we're not really there yet. My marker's dying on you guys. I'm going to trade it out. So ascending limb of loop of Henle, and then your distal convolated tubule. So this is your distal convolated tubule. To the left is your proximal convolated tubule. And this is going to be your loop of Henle. So in this section, we're going to talk about tubular reabsorption. When you say tubular reabsorption, you need to reclaim substances back to the body. Now, reabsorption is going to include simple diffusion, so when you move areas from high concentration to low concentration, but it's also going to involve some active transport where you're going to have to force it out. So the first spot that I want to talk about is your proximal convolated tubule. Your proximal convolated tubule is the area where you're going to have most reabsorption in the entire body. Mostly because it's where your filtrate is going to exit. So remember your filtrate. Your filtrate is going to empty into the proximal convoluted tubule. So filtration is always going to be at the glomerulus. That's filtration. Now we're doing reabsorption. So the filtrate travels through the proximal convoluted tubule, and we need to reabsorb substances back to the blood. So when we talk about reabsorption, most reabsorption is going to occur at the proximal convoluted tubule. You need to get those nutrients back that got filtered. So in the proximal convoluted tubule, you're going to have most reabsorption. So you're going to have 65% of your water reabsorbed. Water is the most important thing that we reabsorb. We're going to basically reabsorb 100% of your glucose. If you ever have glucose in your urine, it's called glucoseuria. Basically, you've gone past threshold. It might indicate that you're diabetic. So we have basically 65% of our electrolytes. Electrolytes that we're going to mostly absorb are going to be sodium and chloride, but we're also going to reabsorb potassium and calcium. Those are electrolytes, anything that dissolves in water. 90% of your bicarbonate, that's another something with the charge, and then amino acids. So most things are going to be reabsorbed at the proximal convoluted tubule. Now, this is important. In the loop of Henle, we have to have something called the countercurrent multiplier, the countercurrent exchanger. So we're going to be talking about the loop of Henle and what things are reabsorbed. This is important. The descending limb of the loop of Henle is going to reabsorb 25% of your water. Now the opposite side, your ascending limb of the loop of Henle, is going to reabsorb 25% of your sodium chloride. Now we are going to call this the countercurrent multiplier. Every time you reabsorb salt back into the blood, you're going to reabsorb water. So you reabsorb salt, therefore water follows. So actually, this side reabsorbs salt and this side reabsorbs water. That's going to be very important for basically concentrating our urine. So the descending limb, so filtrate is going down. The descending limb is going to reabsorb 25% of your water, and your ascending limb, so it goes through the loop and then it goes up, so your ascending limb is going to reabsorb 25% of your sodium chloride. Now this right here, this mechanism, which we're going to talk about, is called our counter current mechanism. So we're going to be reviewing this as we go. This section is very important. Now, as far as reabsorption goes, after you've reabsorbed 25% of your water and 65%, you need to reabsorb the remaining amount of water. So it's going to reach the filtrate's going to reach the distal convoluted tubule. Basically, you are going to reabsorb reabsorb the remaining water, whatever's left, not much. Basically, we need to reabsorb the remaining amount of sodium chloride because that's going to be important. So remember, water always follows chloride. We need to reabsorb the remaining amount of our calcium and the remaining amount of our bicarbonate. So that's tubular reabsorption. So now we need to talk about tubular secretion. So I could ask on the test, where does filtration occur? Filtration is always going to occur at the glomerulus. You should know the pressures that are involved there. Your GFR and your auto-regulation of those. That's the hardest section, is your GFR. Now, so we're on tubular secretion, so we need to have our proximal convoluted tubule. It is tubular, so we're talking about the renal tubule. The descending limb of the loop of Henle. The ascending limb of the loop of Henle. And the distal convoluted tubule. Again, this is tubular secretion. So when you say tubular secretion, you have substances are being removed from the blood to the filtrate. So basically, anything that we put into the tube is going to go out with the urine. So when we talked about things that are waste products, we have electrolytes that we need to get rid of, especially hydrogen ions, because if we don't, it's going to be very acidic. So we need to do a little label in here. This is your proximal convoluted tubule. We're going to have some secretion that occurs here, and your distal convoluted tubule. Alright, as far as secretion goes, we need to get rid of the waste. So nothing is really going to occur in the loop of Henle, because your loop of Henle is going to be reserved for the countercurrent mechanism. But at the distal convoluted tubule and the proximal convoluted tubule, this is where your secretion is going to actually occur. So we're going to start with the proximal convoluted tubule. Now you are going to have things being reabsorbed, but now we need to get rid of waste. So secretion, this is waste in the capillary bed surrounding the tubules, so it could be called the vasa recta or the peritubular capillary beds, that needs to get secreted or placed back into the proximal convoluted tubule. So that's going to include your hydrogen ions, which are basically going to make your urine acidic, and uric acid. Uric acid, I believe, and don't quote me on this, is the breakdown of DNA and RNA. So we secrete hydrogen ions and uric acid to the proximal convoluted tubule. Now, we know that we were going to reabsorb sodium, and sodium, but we need a place to get rid of potassium. So in your distal convoluted tubule, this is where you are going to get rid of waste such as potassium and hydrogen. So the waste from the capillary beds that get secreted into the distal convoluted tubule include potassium and hydrogen. So we reabsorb most sodium, but we get rid of potassium. So that's tubular secretion. Now we have a whole section that we need to cover called the countercurrent mechanism, which is going to involve sodium and chloride, but I'm going to start a different video.